Welcome to Pam Jammer's Regression Tales. We post new stories every week, so be sure to subscribe, like, and share to stay updated. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Perfectly Matched. Chapter 1: A Package at the Door. The sound of a delivery truck rumbling down the street pulled Terrence away from his spreadsheet. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his small hands smoothing the front of his well-ironed button-up shirt. His flat-top haircut was perfectly styled, something he took pride in, even if his appearance often got him teased for looking like a modern-day Urkel. Working from home suited him perfectly. At just 5'6" and with a build so slight that clothes often hung awkwardly on him, Terrence preferred the quiet. Outside the safety of his small duplex, the world had always felt a bit too loud, too judgmental. Here, he could exist in peace, and, more importantly, be himself. The delivery truck came to a halt outside, and Terrence felt a flicker of excitement. His newest package. He glanced at the clock. Almost lunchtime, perfect timing to take a short break. He stood up, adjusting his glasses again out of habit, and stepped toward the door. Opening it, Terrence froze. His porch was empty. His eyes darted to the other side of the shared duplex, where his neighbor stood holding a box. Marcy. Marcy was impossible to miss. At 6 feet tall, with a full, curvaceous figure and a bold presence that commanded every room she entered, she was everything Terrence was not: confident, loud, and unapologetic. Her long, honey-colored curls were pulled into a high ponytail, and her green blouse fit snugly over her curves, paired with jeans that hugged her thick thighs. She always seemed to radiate control and confidence, traits Terrence both admired and found intimidating. She turned toward him, her hazel eyes lighting up as she caught sight of him. "Hey, Terrence," she called, holding up the box. "This yours?" Terrence's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what was in that box, and what the label said. His cheeks burned as he shuffled forward, trying to keep his composure. Yeah, that's probably mine. Sorry about that." Marcy handed him the box, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Comfort boutique? Sounds fancy. Getting yourself something cozy." Terrence's hands trembled as he took the package, clutching it like it might spill all his secrets. Yeah. Just, house stuff." Marcy raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Well, you got it now. Let me know if you need help unpacking," she teased, flashing him a grin. "Thanks," Terrence mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. He retreated into his side of the duplex, closing the door behind him as quickly as he could. He leaned against it, heart pounding. The words Comfort Boutique might not explicitly give away what was inside, but Marcy's curious expression had been enough to rattle him. Inside the box were pastel diapers and accessories he'd carefully picked out, things that had become part of his private world, the one he never intended to share. "Calm down," he muttered to himself. "She doesn't know anything." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Later that evening, Marcy poured herself a glass of wine, her thoughts drifting back to the encounter with Terrence. The box, his stammering response, the way his hands had shaken slightly as he took it, it all painted a picture she couldn't quite put together yet. She'd always been good at reading people, and Terrence was like an open book, even if he didn't realize it. She smiled to herself. Terrence was adorable in a way that felt unintentional. His slight frame, oversized glasses, and nervous energy made him stand out from anyone she'd ever met. She'd joked with herself before about calling him Urkel because of his build, but the comparison felt almost unfair. Terrence had his own quiet charm, something she found increasingly intriguing. "Maybe it's time to get to know my neighbor," she said aloud, swirling the wine in her glass. She wasn't sure what he was hiding, but she had a feeling there was more to Terrence than met the eye. Terrence sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the unopened package on the coffee table. He wanted to open it, to let himself sink into the comfort of the world he'd built for himself, but the memory of Marcy's playful smile kept flashing in his mind. The way she'd said cozy had felt teasing but not cruel, like she knew there was something unusual about the package but didn't judge him for it. That only made it worse. What if she started asking questions? What if she figured out the truth? Terrence shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. He reached for the package, but a knock at the door made him freeze. His heart jumped as he stood, inching toward the peephole. Marcy. His stomach churned with both nerves and curiosity. Slowly, he opened the door. "Hi," he said, his voice barely audible. Marcy leaned against the doorframe, her towering figure making him feel even smaller than usual. She smiled warmly. "Hey, Terrence. I was thinking, we've been neighbors for a while, but we've never really hung out. How about dinner tomorrow? My treat." Terrence blinked, caught off guard. "Dinner? Oh. Her smile widened, her voice softening. "No pressure. I just thought it might be nice to get to know each other. What do you say?" Terrence hesitated, his thoughts a jumble of fear and excitement. Marcy's confidence was overwhelming, but there was something disarming about her, too. Finally, he nodded. "Sure. Dinner sounds nice." "Great," she said, her grin playful. "I'll swing by around 7. Oh, and don't forget to bring your appetite, Urkel." Terrence's mouth opened, but no words came out. By the time he registered the nickname, Marcy was already walking back to her side of the duplex, her laugh echoing softly in the evening air. As he closed the door, Terrence leaned against it, his head spinning. Dinner with Marcy. The confident, statuesque woman next door. Part of him was terrified, but another part, the part that had spent too long hiding, felt something else. Hope. Chapter 2, A Shared Bottle of Wine. Terrence had been staring at his closet for the better part of 20 minutes. The dinner invitation from Marcy had left him both flustered and unsure of himself. His wardrobe, full of plain button-ups and neutral-colored slacks, was practical but far from fashionable. Finally, he chose his least wrinkled shirt, a pale blue one that fit him a little snugly around the shoulders, and paired it with khakis. He smoothed down the front, adjusted his glasses, and took a deep breath. When Marcy knocked at precisely 7, Terrence opened the door to see her standing there, larger than life. She'd swapped her casual jeans for a flowing dress that highlighted her tall, curvy frame, the deep red fabric striking against her honey blonde curls. She smiled at him, her eyes scanning him with amused approval. "You clean up nice, Terrence," she teased. Terrence flushed, stammering, "Thanks. You look great." "I know," Marcy said with a wink. "Now come on. I've got dinner waiting." Marcy's dining room was as bold as she was, bright colors, oversized artwork, and a bookshelf that nearly stretched to the ceiling. Terrence sat at the round table, feeling small but strangely comfortable in the vibrant space. Marcy placed a steaming casserole dish in the center, then poured them each a generous glass of wine. "To neighbors finally getting to know each other," she said, raising her glass. Terrence hesitated for half a second before clinking his glass against hers. To neighbors. The wine was smooth and fruity, and after the first glass, Terrence felt the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. Conversation flowed easily, Marcy's warmth and humor coaxing him out of his usual shyness. "So, Terrence," she said, pouring their second glass, "tell me about yourself. What's your story? What made you move into this little duplex?" Terrence hesitated, glancing at the rim of his glass. He'd spent most of his life avoiding these kinds of questions, but there was something about Marcy that felt safe, like she wasn't judging him, just genuinely curious. "Well," he began, his voice quiet, "I guess I've always wanted a place that felt mine. Growing up, I didn't really have that." Marcy tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I grew up in foster care," he admitted. "I never knew my parents. I was shuffled around a lot, and I guess I just got used to taking care of myself. No one else really did." Marcy's expression softened, and she leaned forward slightly. That must have been so hard. Terrence shrugged, trying to keep his tone light. It wasn't all bad. I learned how to be independent. But I guess I've always wanted something else. You know, someone who cares. Someone who, I don't know, makes me feel like I don't have to do it all alone. Marcy nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. I get that, she said after a moment. More than you might think. Terrence blinked, surprised. You do? She swirled her wine, her expression distant for a moment. My dad was a gambler. A big one. He was charming, sure, but he couldn't hold on to $1 to save his life. By the time I was a teenager, he'd gambled away everything, our savings, our house, all of it. He died not long after that, and it was up to me and my mom to pick up the pieces. Terrence's heart tightened. That sounds awful. It was, Marcy admitted. But it taught me a lot. Like, I can't just sit back and let someone else run the show. I have to be in control. That's the only way I feel safe. Her words hung in the air for a moment, both of them taking quiet sips of their wine as they let the weight of the conversation settle. You know, Terrence said after a long pause, it's funny. We're pretty different, but I think we're kind of the same, too. Marcy raised an eyebrow. Oh? How's that? Well, Terrence began, fiddling with the stem of his glass, I've always felt like I wanted someone to take care of me. Someone I could trust to, you know, make me feel like a kid again. Not in a bad way, just safe. Marcy nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. And I've always needed to be the one in control. To make sure nothing falls apart. I guess. I've never thought about it like this, but maybe what I really want is someone I can take care of. Someone who trusts me enough to let me do that. Terrence looked up, meeting her eyes. You really think that works? Marcy smiled, a warmth spreading across her face. I think it works better than anything else I've tried. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Marcy leaned back in her chair, her grin returning. You're a good guy, Terrence. I can tell. And I think you've got a lot more strength in you than you give yourself credit for. Terrence smiled shyly, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Thanks. You're pretty great too. Damn right I am, Marcy said with a laugh, raising her glass. And don't you forget it. By the time they'd finished the bottle of wine, the casserole was mostly gone, and the conversation had shifted to lighter topics. Marcy teased Terrence about his love of spreadsheets, and Terrence made a joke about her boss lady vibe, earning a booming laugh that lit up the room. As Terrence walked back to his side of the duplex later that night, his mind buzzed, not from the wine, but from the feeling that something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone. In her own kitchen, Marcy poured herself a glass of water, her thoughts lingering on Terrence's quiet smile and soft voice. He was nothing like the men she'd dated before, and yet, something about him felt right. Neither of them realized it yet, but they had found something rare that night, a connection that fit like a lock and key, built on the understanding of two people who, in their own ways, had spent their lives searching for the same thing. Chapter 3, Thinking of Each Other. Terrence sat at his desk, his fingers idly tapping on the keyboard as rows of numbers blurred together on his screen. No matter how hard he tried to focus, his thoughts kept drifting to Marcy. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about her since their dinner. The way her voice shifted from playful teasing to warm sincerity, the way she seemed to understand him so easily, it all left him feeling light-headed and restless. His duplex, as always, was spotless and orderly, the very picture of practicality. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, and the colors subdued, grays, whites, blacks. It was simple, functional, and completely free of any personal touches. Everything had its place. That included the locked chest in his bedroom closet. Terrence's stomach tightened as his eyes flicked toward the bedroom door. His secret world, the pastel dresses, the diapers, the pacifiers, was all tucked away in that chest, hidden under a combination lock he checked twice a week. But those weren't the only things inside. Alongside the baby gear were items Terrence had accumulated over the years, items he had never dared to use outside the privacy of his imagination. There was a collection of smooth, colorful butt plugs, neatly stored in their original packaging. There was the chastity device he'd purchased on a whim, intrigued by the idea of surrendering control to someone else. And then there were the locking panties, something he discovered during one late-night browse on Comfort Boutique's website. The thought of being unable to remove anything without permission had thrilled and terrified him, and the panties had remained unused but carefully preserved. Just thinking about the contents of the chest made Terrence's heart race. They were symbols of his deepest desires, the need to surrender, to feel cared for, to have someone else take charge. And now, for the first time, he felt the faintest glimmer of hope that he might be able to share those desires with someone. Someone like Marcy. Marcy sat at her desk in the call center, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone during a rare moment of downtime. She had promised herself she wouldn't keep obsessing over Terrence, but it was impossible. He was just so different. Quiet, shy, and so genuine that it made her chest tighten whenever she thought about him. And then there was the package. After dinner, Marcy's curiosity had gotten the better of her, and she'd Googled Comfort Boutique. What she found had made her stop and stare at the screen. Adult-sized diapers, pacifiers, frilly dresses, and then she'd scrolled further. The site also featured items like butt plugs, chastity devices, and locking panties. Marcy had clicked through the pages, her heart racing as she realized what the site offered. Control. Everything about the items screamed control, having it, holding it, and using it in deeply intimate and playful ways. The thought of Terrence, sweet and vulnerable, trusting her enough to let her take charge of him in such a way made her chest feel tight. She could picture him so clearly, dressed in pastel, obediently waiting for her approval, and completely hers. Marcy leaned back in her chair, a small smile spreading across her face. It wasn't just adorable, it was intoxicating. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Terrence wasn't just shy, he was someone who craved care and structure. And she was someone who craved control. It felt like a perfect fit. "You're full of surprises, aren't you, Terrence?" she murmured to herself. The thought of seeing him again sent a thrill through her. She'd text him that evening, no way was she waiting long for their next dinner. Marcy texted him just after dinner, "Hey, neighbor. Dinner again? My turn to come over to your place this time. Friday night?" Terrence's reply came almost immediately, "Yes. Friday works. 7 p.m.? Marcy grinned at her phone. "Perfect," she whispered to herself. Terrence had spent all of Friday making sure his duplex was immaculate. It wasn't hard, his minimalist space was already pristine. The bare walls and muted tones felt clinical to most, but to Terrence, they were comforting. Nothing messy, nothing unpredictable. Everything was in its place. His bedroom closet, however, had gotten extra attention. He checked the chest again before Marcy's arrival, spinning the combination lock twice to make sure it was secure. The chest contained all his secrets, and while part of him wanted to share them, the thought of Marcy opening it tonight was still too overwhelming to bear. When the knock came at 7 o'clock sharp, Terrence opened the door to find Marcy standing there, as stunning as ever. She wore a fitted black dress that hugged her curves in all the right ways, and her honey blonde curls shimmered under the porch light. "You clean up nice, Urkel," she teased, stepping inside. Terrence flushed but managed a small laugh. "Thanks. You look amazing." "Always," Marcy said with a wink. Her eyes roamed the space as she walked in, taking in the minimalist decor. "Wow," she said, raising an eyebrow. "This is very different from my place. You're either a minimalist or a serial killer." Terrence laughed nervously, his cheeks pink. "Just a minimalist, I promise. Dinner went smoothly, the wine flowing as easily as their conversation. Marcy talked about her family again, sharing more about how she had to grow up fast after her father's gambling left them destitute. Terrence, in turn, found himself opening up about his foster care days, surprising himself with how much he wanted to share with her. As they finished their second glass of wine, Marcy reached across the table and took his hand in hers. Her touch was warm and steady, and the sincerity in her hazel eyes made Terrence's heart race. "Terrence," she said gently, "I just want you to know. You can trust me. With anything. I mean it. I like you, and I think we have something special. So if there's ever something you want to tell me, anything, I want you to know it's okay. I won't judge." Terrence stared at her, his chest tightening. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The locked chest in his bedroom seemed to call to him, its contents suddenly feeling less like secrets and more like possibilities. Maybe it was time. Terrence swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "Thanks, Marcy. That means more than you know." Marcy smiled, giving his hand a gentle squeeze before leaning back in her chair. "Good. Now, how about another glass of wine?" As she poured, Terrence felt the fear in his chest begin to shift into something else. Excitement. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone he could finally trust. After dinner, the empty wine glasses and plates were still on the table, but neither Terrence nor Marcy seemed in any hurry to clean up. The conversation had taken on a relaxed, warm flow, and Marcy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. "You know," she said, swirling the last sip of wine in her glass, "we've got a little time to kill. How about we watch something?" Yeah," Terrence replied, caught off guard but eager to please. "Sure. I don't really watch a lot of movies, though. Mostly, big stuff, like Marvel movies or Mission Impossible." Marcy chuckled, standing and gathering their glasses. "I figured. But I think I've got the perfect movie for us. Something a little different." Terrence followed her into the living room, where she gestured for him to sit while she took the remote. His living room, like the rest of the duplex, was minimalist and spotless, with a single dark grey couch and a plain black coffee table. Marcy plopped down beside him, kicking off her heels and scrolling through his streaming service. "What are you thinking?" Terrence asked, nervously adjusting his glasses. She glanced at him, her lips curving into a playful smile. "It's called Secretary. Have you heard of it?" He frowned, shaking his head. "No. What's it about?" "It's a romance," Marcy said carefully, her voice casual. "But it's not your typical one. It's about two people figuring out what works for them, and there's a little bit of, let's say, power dynamics involved." Terrence swallowed hard, his curiosity piqued but his nerves rising. Okay. Sure. Sounds interesting." Marcy clicked play, the glow of the screen illuminating the living room. As the movie began, Terrence found himself leaning into the story. The romance between the two characters was unconventional, but there was something deeply relatable about the vulnerability and trust they shared. Halfway through the movie, Marcy had moved closer to Terrence, draping her arm over the back of the couch. At first, the proximity made him tense, but as the minutes passed, he began to relax. When she shifted again, pulling him gently against her side, he didn't resist. Her hand rested on his arm, her touch firm and steady, and she leaned her cheek against the top of his head. For Terrence, the sensation was overwhelming, in the best way. Marcy's presence was so warm, so encompassing, that it felt like he was being enveloped in a cocoon of safety. He glanced at the screen, but his focus was slipping. The movie's themes of control and trust mirrored his own thoughts too closely, and he couldn't stop his mind from wandering. All he could think about was the chest in his closet and the secrets it held. Would she understand? Would she think it was weird? Or would she smile the way she always did, with that mix of curiosity and approval that made him feel like he could do no wrong? His heart pounded as he tried to focus on the movie, But Marcy's closeness and the story unfolding on the screen made it impossible. He didn't just want to tell her. He needed to. The movie paused as Marcy grabbed the remote and stood. "Bathroom break," she said with a grin. "Don't go anywhere." Terrence nodded, his stomach flipping. As she disappeared down the hallway, he stared at the frozen frame on the screen, his mind racing. This was the moment. He could feel it. When Marcy returned, she flopped back onto the couch beside him, her arm immediately finding its place around his shoulders again. She reached for the remote, but Terrence hesitated, his voice breaking the silence. "Marcy," he said softly. She looked at him, her expression warm but curious. "What's up?" Terrence's hands fidgeted in his lap, his heart racing. I want to tell you something." Her eyes softened, and she leaned in slightly, her voice calm and steady. "You can tell me anything, Terrence. I promise." He took a deep breath, the words caught in his throat. But when he looked into her hazel eyes, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. "I mean it," Marcy added gently, her hand resting on his arm. "Whatever it is, you don't have to be scared." Terrence swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he finally spoke. "Okay. I'll tell you." Chapter 4, Opening Up. Terrence fidgeted on the couch, his hands twisting together in his lap. Marcy's hazel eyes were locked on his, steady and warm, and her presence felt both comforting and overwhelming. She had shifted closer to him after he'd said he wanted to tell her something, and now her arm brushed against his as she leaned in slightly, her hand resting gently on his knee. "You don't have to rush," she said softly, her voice like a blanket of reassurance. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Terrence nodded, but his throat felt tight. He'd been building up to this moment for years, and now that it was here, he didn't know how to begin. "I've never told anyone this," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ever. It's really hard to talk about." Marcy gave his knee a gentle squeeze, her expression calm and patient. "That's okay. I get it. But whatever it is, I promise it's safe with me." Terrence swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the paused movie on the screen before flicking back to her. "It's just, I've always felt like something was missing in my life. Like, I didn't get to have a childhood the way other people did. And I guess I've always kind of wanted to go back to that." Marcy tilted her head, her expression thoughtful but encouraging. "You mean, like, being a kid again?" Terrence nodded, his face turning bright red. "Yeah. Like being little. Not having to take care of myself all the time. Just being cared for." Marcy's hand stayed steady on his knee, her eyes never leaving his. "That makes sense," she said gently. "And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's really sweet." Terrence let out a shaky breath, feeling a flicker of relief at her words. "It's more than that," he admitted. "More how?" she asked, her tone soft and curious. He hesitated, his hands twisting tighter. Marcy leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Do you mean like wearing kid clothes?" Terrence nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yeah. Like diapers?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Terrence froze, his entire body tense. His voice failed him, but he managed to give a small, almost imperceptible nod. Marcy's face lit up, and she gave his knee another reassuring squeeze. "Terrence, that's adorable. There's nothing wrong with that at all." He blinked at her, stunned. You don't think it's weird?" "No," she said with a laugh, her smile widening. "I think it's cute. Honestly, I think it's really fun. And I bet you'd look absolutely precious in a diaper." Terrence's face burned, his heart pounding so loudly he thought she might hear it. You think so?" "Of course," Marcy said without hesitation. Her hand squeezed his knee again, her thumb brushing lightly over the fabric of his pants. Do you have any here? Terrence's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't bring himself to say it, so he nodded. Marcy grinned, leaning back slightly but keeping her hand on his knee. Can you show me one? Terrence hesitated, his mind spinning. The fear of exposure clashed with the thrill of finally being seen and accepted. Slowly, he nodded again. He stood, his legs feeling shaky as he made his way to his bedroom. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst as he opened the closet door and crouched in front of the locked chest. His hands trembled as he entered the combination, the lock clicking open with a soft sound that echoed in his ears. Lifting the lid, he stared at the carefully organized contents inside. The pastel dresses, the pacifiers, the butt plugs, the chastity device, the locking panties, it was all there, hidden but now on the verge of being shared. His hand hovered over a thick disposable diaper decorated with pink flowers, its soft crinkling texture sending a wave of nervous energy through him. He picked it up, holding it gingerly, and turned to leave the room. But as he stood, he froze in place. Marcy was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed casually over her chest, a playful but understanding smile on her face. Terrence's face burned, and his body felt like it was on fire. I didn't know you were. Marcy stepped into the room, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached out and gently took the diaper from his hands, inspecting it with a soft smile. Then she glanced at the bed and back at Terrence, her hazel eyes sparkling. I think, she said, her voice calm and steady, it's time for my little boy to get changed into his diaper. Terrence's breath hitched, his heart racing. Her words sent a wave of emotions through him, fear, excitement, disbelief, but most of all, a profound sense of relief. For the first time, he felt like he didn't have to hide anymore. Chapter 5: A Caregiver's Embrace. Terrence's face burned as he saw Marcy holding the diaper, her hazel eyes sparkling with warmth and understanding. But when she glanced toward the open chest, his stomach flipped with panic. Without thinking, he lunged forward, quickly closing the lid and spinning the combination lock with trembling hands. I didn't mean for you to see all that, he stammered, his voice shaking. It's just. It's. Marcy stepped closer, her tall, curvaceous frame towering over him in the small room. She rested a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, her voice calm and gentle. Terrence, she said softly, it's okay. Really. There's nothing in there that could make me think less of you. Terrence swallowed hard, looking up at her, and found himself stunned by the sincerity in her gaze. Her hand slid down to his. Come here, she said, her tone firm but kind. Before he could process what was happening, Marcy guided him toward the bed, her movements deliberate but unhurried. She set the diaper on the mattress and eased him onto his back, the mattress creaking softly beneath them. Then, to Terrence's utter disbelief, she climbed on top of him, her full frame completely enveloping his petite body. Terrence froze, his breath catching as she leaned over him, her honey blonde curls framing her face. Her weight pressed against him in a way that made him feel small, protected, and cared for all at once. You're so cute, she murmured, her voice a mix of affection and playfulness. You're like a little doll I get to take care of. Her lips brushed against his forehead, then his cheek, and finally found his mouth. Her kisses were slow and tender, her hands cupping his face as she leaned into him. Terrence felt his body relax beneath her, his nervousness giving way to a wave of warmth and longing. As they kissed, Marcy's hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, her touch steady and deliberate. She unfastened each one with care, pausing to press soft kisses to his chest, his collarbone, and the delicate curve of his neck. Terrence's breathing grew shallow as her hands moved lower, undressing him with the same gentle precision. Every touch, every kiss made him feel more connected to her, like she was peeling away the layers of his fear and hesitation along with his clothes. When she finally undressed him fully, she sat back for a moment, the diaper still in her hands. She looked down at him with a soft smile, her eyes filled with admiration. Look at you, she said, her voice low and warm. "You're so beautiful, Terrence. I can't believe no one's done this for you before." Terrence swallowed hard, his whole body tingling with anticipation. I never thought anyone would." Marcy's smile widened as she unfolded the diaper, the loud crinkle of the material filling the room. She patted the mattress lightly. "Lift your hips for me, baby." Terrence obeyed without thinking, his body moving on instinct. Marcy slid the diaper under him with practiced ease, her movements smooth and confident. As she adjusted it beneath him, she let out a soft laugh. "Your little butt is so cute. It's like a little peach." Terrence's face turned crimson, but he couldn't help the shy smile that spread across his lips. Marcy pulled the thick diaper up over his waist, smoothing the soft material against his skin. She took her time, securing the tapes one by one with firm precision, ensuring the fit was snug and perfect. The crinkling sound was louder now, filling the air as she patted the front of the diaper with satisfaction. "There we go," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Nice and snug. Just like it should be." Terrence lay there, his mind spinning. He'd diapered himself countless times, but this was something entirely different. Marcy's attention to detail, the way she adjusted every fold and tape with care, made the experience feel intimate in a way he'd never imagined. He felt a mix of emotions, relief, excitement, disbelief, but most of all, he felt seen. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't just accepting this part of him. She was embracing it. As Marcy leaned down, pressing a kiss to his belly, Terrence felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly brought tears to his eyes. Marcy moved back up to his face, her lips finding his again in a series of soft, lingering kisses. "You're amazing, Terrence," she whispered between kisses. "I hope you know that." Terrence's voice was barely audible. "I feel like I'm dreaming." Marcy smiled, wrapping her arms around him and pulling him close. "Then let's stay in this dream for a while." She shifted to lie beside him, her arms holding him tightly as she buried her face in his neck. Terrence could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her body enveloping him like a cocoon. For the rest of the night, they stayed like that, snuggled together in a tangle of limbs and soft whispers. Marcy's protective embrace made Terrence feel safer than he ever had, and Marcy, in turn, felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For both of them, it was the best night they could remember, an evening filled with trust, affection, and the undeniable feeling that they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for. Chapter 6, Morning After. Terrence stirred awake to the sound of movement in the kitchen. The sunlight streaming through the window bathed his minimalistic bedroom in a soft glow, and for a moment, he lay still, unsure if the night before had been real. But the crinkle of the diaper around his waist brought everything back in vivid detail: Marcy's gentle hands, her warm kisses, and the overwhelming feeling of being cared for in a way he'd never experienced before. He shifted slightly, the snugness of the diaper both comforting and unfamiliar. His heart skipped as he realized he wasn't alone. Marcy was still there, moving about his small duplex like she belonged. A knock came at his bedroom door, followed by her voice, warm and teasing. "Morning, sleepyhead. Breakfast is almost ready. But don't bother getting dressed, I think you're perfect just the way you are." Terrence's cheeks flushed, but he couldn't stop the small smile that crept across his face. He climbed out of bed, the diaper crinkling with every movement, and made his way to the kitchen. Marcy stood at the stove, her long curls tied up in a messy bun. She glanced over her shoulder and grinned. "There's my little guy," she said, her eyes twinkling. Terrence hesitated at the doorway, suddenly feeling exposed in just his diaper and glasses. But Marcy waved him over. "Come on, sit down. Breakfast is almost done." He shuffled to the small dining table, sitting carefully on one of the chairs. The crinkle of his diaper was loud in the quiet room, and he felt his face heat again. But Marcy didn't seem fazed. She hummed softly as she scrambled eggs, toasted bread, and poured coffee into 2 mugs. When she set the plates down in front of him, Marcy leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "Eat up," she said cheerfully. "You'll need your strength for later." Terrence blushed but picked up his fork, his nervousness melting slightly at her playful tone. As they ate, Marcy did most of the talking, her voice light but sincere. "I just want you to know," she began, pausing to sip her coffee, "that nothing from last night scared me. If anything, it made me like you even more." Terrence glanced at her, his chest tightening. "Really?" Marcy nodded, her expression softening. "Really? You're so genuine, Terrence. And I love that you trust me enough to share this side of yourself. It's not weird or scary, it's just you. And I think it's adorable." Terrence's heart raced, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding through him. "I was so afraid you'd think I was. I don't know, too much." Marcy reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You're not too much," she said firmly. "But I do need to ask you for something." Terrence froze, his fork hovering over his plate. "What's that?" "Transparency," Marcy said, her voice steady. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, I need to feel like I know everything. No secrets, no hiding. That's the only way I can feel safe. Does that make sense?" Terrence nodded slowly, his stomach twisting with a mix of fear and longing. "Yeah, it makes sense." She smiled, her hand squeezing his lightly. "Good. So, how about after breakfast, you show me what else is in that chest?" Terrence's breath caught. He wanted to say no, to keep the rest of his secrets locked away. But the warmth in her eyes, the way her hand never left his, made it impossible. He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Okay." After breakfast, Marcy led him back to his bedroom, her hand resting lightly on his back. As they reached the room, Terrence froze, his whole body tensing as he felt a sudden release. The warmth spreading through his diaper made his cheeks flush with embarrassment. He'd been holding it all night, too nervous to get up or ask for anything, and now it was too late. Marcy seemed to notice his hesitation, her hand sliding to his arm. "You okay, baby?" Terrence nodded quickly, though his face burned. Yeah. Just nervous." Marcy smiled, her tone playful but gentle. "Nothing to be nervous about." She gestured toward the chest. "Let's see what you've got in there." Terrence moved toward the closet like he was in a trance, his mind racing. He crouched in front of the chest, his hands shaking as he reached for the lock. But before he could spin the combination, Marcy crouched beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Wait," she said softly. "What's the combination?" Terrence froze, looking up at her with wide eyes. "I told you," she continued, her voice calm and steady. "No secrets. If this is going to work, I need to know I can trust you as much as you trust me." He hesitated for a moment, his mind warring with itself. But then he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the 21st of July 2010. Marcy smiled, leaning in and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good boy." Terrence's whole body tingled at her words, and he turned back to the chest, unlocking it with trembling hands. As the lid creaked open, his breath hitched. Marcy straightened, looking down at the chest's contents with a mixture of curiosity and delight. "Well, look at this," she said softly. The pastel dresses were folded neatly beside the pacifiers. The butt plugs were arranged in a row, their vibrant colors gleaming faintly in the soft light. The chastity device rested in its original box, and the locking panties were folded delicately in the corner. Marcy reached down, picking up the panties and holding them up with a grin. "These are adorable," she said, her tone warm and playful. Terrence swallowed hard, his whole body on fire. Marcy glanced at him, her hazel eyes sparkling. "Sit on the bed, baby. I want to see you while I look through this." Terrence hesitated but obeyed, his diaper crinkling as he settled onto the mattress. The warmth in the diaper made him shift uncomfortably, but Marcy didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't comment. As she continued to explore the chest, Terrence's heart raced. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was too much, too fast. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the relief of finally being seen, fully and completely. And for the first time, he dared to hope that Marcy wouldn't just accept him, she'd embrace him. Chapter 7: A New Beginning. Terrence sat on the edge of the bed, his hands folded tightly in his lap as Marcy crouched in front of the open chest. The diaper he wore crinkled softly as he shifted nervously, the warmth between his legs a constant reminder of how far they'd come in such a short time. He watched as Marcy carefully picked up each item, her expression a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. "This," she said, holding up an adult-sized pink pacifier, "is adorable. I can't wait to see you use it." Terrence blushed, his fingers fidgeting, but he didn't look away. Her tone wasn't teasing, it was warm, affectionate, and full of purpose. Marcy set the pacifier aside and turned to him, her hazel eyes steady. "Terrence," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I've been thinking a lot about how we're going to make this work. What I want. What you need. And I think I know exactly how we can do this in a way that makes us both happy." Terrence nodded, his heart racing. "First," Marcy said, picking up another diaper from the chest, this one decorated with colorful stars, "you're going to wear diapers all the time now. 24/7. The toilet is officially off limits." Terrence's mouth opened slightly, but he found himself nodding without hesitation. "And," she continued, unfolding the diaper and smoothing it out on her lap, "only I am allowed to change you. No sneaking or trying to take care of it yourself. That's my job. Got it?" "Got it," Terrence murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcy smiled, leaning forward to kiss his forehead. "Good boy." She reached back into the chest, pulling out a pastel pink dress with white lace trim. "When you're at home, which is most of the time, you won't be wearing your normal clothes. No more button-ups and slacks. Just these little dresses. They suit you so much better." Terrence felt his cheeks burn, but his heart swelled at the thought. "Okay," he whispered. Marcy set the dress aside and pulled out the chastity device, inspecting it thoughtfully. "Now, this," she said, holding it up, "is going to be very important. I need to know that I can trust you completely, that you'll be faithful to me and only me. So, you're going to wear this all the time. I'll keep the key." Terrence nodded, his voice catching in his throat. "And the locking panties," she added, holding them up with a smile. "These go on over your diaper every day. They'll make sure you don't take it off when I'm not here. Again, I'll hold the key." Terrence swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion. "I understand," he said softly. Marcy smiled, setting the panties aside and reaching for the small collection of colorful butt plugs. "Now, I know you wouldn't want to sit in a messy diaper all day while I'm at work," she said, her tone playful but practical. "So every morning before I leave, I'll put one of these in. It'll make sure you stay comfortable until I'm back." Terrence's eyes widened, but the calm assurance in Marcy's voice soothed his nerves. "You've really thought of everything," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "Of course I did," Marcy replied, her smile softening. "This is about taking care of you, Terrence. Making sure you're happy, safe, and exactly where you need to be." As Marcy finished laying out the items, she turned back to Terrence, her expression tender. "How does that sound to you, baby?" Terrence's eyes filled with tears, his emotions bubbling over. He had spent so many years longing for this, for someone to see him, to accept him, and to take care of him in a way that felt so deeply right. He threw his arms around Marcy, burying his face against her shoulder. "It sounds perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Marcy's arms wrapped around him tightly, her large frame enveloping his smaller one completely. She kissed the top of his head, his cheeks, and his neck, her lips soft and reassuring. "Oh, you're adorable," she murmured. "I'm so happy I found you." Terrence nodded against her, his tears dampening her shirt. Me too, he said, his voice trembling. I don't know how I got so lucky, but I'm so happy you're here. Marcy pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands, her hazel eyes shimmering. You don't have to be afraid anymore, she said softly. I've got you. And I'm not going anywhere. Terren smiled through his tears, leaning into her touch. I've got you too, he said. Marcy leaned down, capturing his lips in a tender kiss. Then she pulled him into another hug, holding him so tightly he felt like he might disappear into her. For the first time in their lives, both of them felt whole, like they had found exactly what they needed in each other. Thanks so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this week's story and found it relatable, informative, or just a little comforting. Remember, we post new videos every week, so if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you found this helpful or know someone who might, don't forget to like the video and share it with your community. Your support means everything and helps us keep creating content just for you. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.